This is a special presentation from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network for the 4th of July, 2019. We are combining an old program that was done in 2016 by the late, great Jerry Pippin concerning the plight of veterans. I think it's very important that we mention that today, given that there is later a program on the mall. DJ Trump will be there. The 70-ton Abrams tanks will be there. They will be selling tickets, an event for the privilege. The 1%ers of the world will be the special guests. Normally, the national celebration on the mall is a national celebration. It's not partisan. It doesn't have politics involved in it at all. There is music, there is fireworks. This year the fireworks will be a longer presentation, and all over this nation, 50 continuous states, there will be various celebrations, including at the Charles River. The Pops celebration has been going on for many years. We remember the late great Arthur Fiedler and his historic celebrations there on the banks of the Charles River. But beyond the banks of the Charles River, where we are in Helena, Montana, Los Angeles, New Orleans, Louisiana, Dallas, Texas, Charlotte, North Carolina, to honor, ever higher. Yes, we honor people that are patriots today. Not the phony patriots that parade around calling themselves militias, nationalists, white supremacists, etc. Not those kinds of people. Where we hear terrible reports from Texas, the El Paso area, Clint, Texas, the various stockades operated by the Border Patrol. And when the congressional delegation went there, composed of members from the Hispanic caucus, these border agents had disrespected them on the scene. One wanted to take a selfie with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. The theme goes on. Then we have from La Publica the dramatic events that happened on a quote-unquote secret Facebook page. The presentation we did on the Monday Morning Quarterback, we appended that report so you can read it. You can find that at iHeartRadio, Google Podcast, Stitcher, Streaker, the YouTube, the Internet Archives, and various other places around the Internet that Internet radio is there. And we're very fortunate for recording to have the following Internet radio, Jerry Pippin, here in the broadcast we did some 3 years ago for Memorial Day or Decoration Day. This is truly a people's celebration that we're presenting today, not some contrived, narrow-minded militarist flashback on the past. Nobody has Abrams tanks around anymore. There's 70 tons. They brought them in by a rail car. The concern was they would tear literally up the streets. But what's the whole idea of this? Is to glorify war. And by extension, they're glorifying various paramilitary organizations like the Border Patrol. That is what it is all about. It is not about patriotism. It is not about Patrick Henry and people in Boston, the colonists that were fighting the tyrannical British at the time. It has none of those elements at all in it. Yes, it has elements of the Great War, but it is not up to the task. A task that the Great War, World War II, was a liberation from fascism, from the regime that was out to conquer the world under Schicklgruber, otherwise known as Hitler. He was a nationalist. He was a fascist. He was a militarist along with his other partners, the Japanese and also they had the Spanish dictator there, Franco. And what has unfortunately happened in Europe, in other sectors, what they call Eastern Europe, these nationalist gangs have returned in Poland, hijacked the government there. We actually have nationalists. In the Trump administration at one time, his strategic senior advisor was a character named Bannon. Bannon being a nationalist, associations with quote-unquote white supremacists. This goes on. The whole idea of building this wall is a racist endeavor, and it is now being celebrated on the American Independence Day, along with these other casts of disgraced characters. The idea of imprisoning children, some as young as 1 and 2 years old, not having adequate clothing, hygiene, even drinking water, telling women to drink out of an unsanitary toilet. Those people that are in that disgraced Border Patrol must be terminated immediately. Not only that, the Border Patrol must in itself be totally reorganized. They're not capable of upholding the values of this great nation, and that is what the issue is. The head of the group that represents these characters try to say, well, free individuals. No, this is not about free individuals that were on the so-called secret Facebook page. Now, that's an issue with Facebook to allow this type of racist banner to go on. But it's beyond that. If there were no racist secret so-called Facebook page, and throughout the country there's been many of those by these people in the paramilitary police types, and we'll call them paramilitary squads out there. And we have, as Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says, concentration camps. And even some of the national media there, the corporate media, was sucked in by these characters. They went to visit one of these Border Patrol stockades, and at the stockade, believe it or not, there was food, burritos, and this sort of thing where they're really stocked. It was nothing more than a show. Literally, it was as phony as a sunset in the Arctic during the period of absolute daylight. That was what was going on. So many of these schemes are perpetrated by the corporate media. This is sort of like the debates. You can see the show we did on, hear the show actually we did on the debates at the time, how they were orchestrated. Now we see in the polls, some polls coming out by CNN and some others showing Bernie Sanders falling 4 or 5 points. Also at the same time, Joe Lunchbox Biden is falling after the quote-unquote moment, which we see as a Norman Rockwell moment. Norman Rockwell, incidentally, painted a brilliant portrait of the little girls in Little Rock, Arkansas, fighting a segregation apartheid there. And that is the days that, quote-unquote, America was great again. The candidate, Senator Harris, Kamala Harris of California, illustrated that, and that was in the days when Biden was against what they called, and this again came from the corporate media, forced busing. This is court-ordered busing to remedy years of segregation, apartheid, redlining, you name it. And he, as an opportunistic politician with Eastland and the rest of the flock, took advantage of that. But the time clock caught up with Biden. Biden had to change his tune and then go into more collaborative work on civil rights. Why is this a big point? Because the corporate media made it a big point to shake up the race and get Kamala Harris further ahead for the moment. Now, you're going to see that throughout the race as it moves on, the 2020 race, up and down, as President Obama would say. Incidentally, we featured President Obama speaking from Hanoi in Vietnam. That great war, conflict that ended, it was one, again, of the Wilsonian foreign policy, a racist foreign policy that was the extermination of the quote-unquote little yellow people in Asia. The Vietnamese fought from a heroic standpoint. They defeated the Vietnamese. That was a puppet government that the U.S. put there and drove the U.S. out of Vietnam. That was a conflict, a loss, not part of Make America Great Again. There were no great, there were battles there, and there were tanks there, but the problem with tanks, that would be more in the Baghdad War and the war in Afghanistan, which is still going on. But an Abrams tank, since it weighs 70 tons, you have to put it on ships. You can't put it on the large aircraft or carriers, and to get it to wherever you're going. And when they were in Germany, the Army Corps of Engineers had to build special bridges. That were when they were set up to fight the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union was no longer, as one would say, facing west, they were facing east. That was a new day in terms of military strategy. And we saw recently here the call by the Trump people and by right-wing militarists for an attack on Iran. Well, there was not a military attack after the so-called setup there of the Iranians supposedly attacking a drone, of all things, a spy drone. Remember back in the 50s, the U-2 fights of Gary, what was his name? Powell, I believe, was shot down. Of course, he was later sent back. But that's the beginning of spying. So how did they react to this? They used cyber warfare to attack Iran and some of their facilities, missile-firing facilities, etc. So perhaps it would be more fitting that DJ Trump would have a computer screen and some computer technicians sitting there, because wars have changed. They're going to cyber warfare that involves computers, to drones instead of aeroplanes. He may have some flyovers and that, wasting gas. But that is not the future of warfare. That is the past. That's a reflection back into your 50s. There's even talk of the Apollo, what was it, 11, some of that thrown into this militaristic parade. Don't be fooled by that. Nostalgia for what NASA did. Oh yes, NASA excuse me, had a space race going on there around John F. Kennedy's dictum to send a person to the moon. He called it a man on the moon. But this was about science and technology, about learning, knowledge work. The current administration, the current time, is not about knowledge work. It is not about science, because we have people out there that literally not believe that the climate can adjust to the destruction caused by humans, period. So science is science. And we have drilling now, supposedly in the Arctic wildlife. Those had not been done, caused a problem with the caribou. That some of the native tribes, the aboriginal tribes in Alaska, still hunt. They use the meat. They're not out there hunting for a display where they put the antelopes on the wall and all that weirdness. This is real-time, sustainable hunting, now separated out from some of the other glorified hunting that these people do. But all of these things are intersecting here. Science is science. And education is education. You'll hear the right-wingers talk, particularly in places like Texas. They wanted to eliminate much of the history. Why do they have this aversion to history? Because much of the history explains in great detail, such as the Civil War, why it was fought, who fought it, and it does not glorify the Confederacy. But these people would like to conveniently do that. So if you do not have any history, this started out with Reagan didn't make any history. Reagan was counter-history. Period. But if you start out with these right-wingers, they would be the only ones in the history book. Their goal is that future generations won't know about why World War II started, why the world responded to Chicken Gruber and his fascism, nationalism, and how it was destroyed by the Red Army. What happened in Vietnam with their patriotic leader Ho Chi Minh, and how the Vietnamese literally had a trail called the Ho Chi Minh Trail. They turned it into a highway where they could move munitions and various things from the north to the south. They sustained a bombing campaign that had never been seen in history. And you had the old-timers from the Second World War that considered Vietnam a Mickey Mouse war. And that was what they would think of these wars that they are honoring now in Baghdad against the Iraqi people, and in Afghanistan against the Afghan people there on the pretense of 911. Now that is debated, who did 911, who didn't do 911. And then we have weapons of mass destruction. There were no weapons of mass destruction. So this was before it recognized fake news, and the attacks, the similar attacks we have now on even media, members of the quote-unquote commercial media, the ABCs, Washington Post, etc., that the attacks on a journalist, the killing of journalists like Khashoggi was killed in Turkey. Not only attacks, but actually the murder, targeted murder of a journalist under the German program of the dirty media, period. So we have that day out here, and all of this conveniently is set in motion. It does not happen in vacuum. So you have people that do not believe in science, do not believe in history, that only believe in what they believe in, period. This is why you have the strident partisanism you have today. But why is that? It's because of the overall condition of capitalism. Now you can bring together various economists, and they will be forced in the final analysis to explain to you that capitalism is in trouble. Incidentally, on the same network, we have a Numbers Man. That is our macroeconomics program. It can be heard on iHeartRadio, on Google Podcasts, and all over the internet, where we talk about what is going on here. What the GDP means. Can GDP be extended? In other words, the current 3.1, and you cannot, because the models and various people, there would be less economic traction in the years to come. And as LBJ would say, everyone that has been to a goat ripping contest knows about this as being a fact, not fake news, period. And not some rant and rave now, even at the Federal Reserve, trying to loop and press it. I guess they were saying the dirty Federal Reserve, because the Federal Reserve would not accommodate this administration, cut interest rates. If you remember, the same people, there's one person they're going to, Trump wants to appoint, said at one time, I believe it's a woman, that interest rates were too low. So see, the right wing at the time of President Obama, interest rates were too low. They wanted interest rates to go up. And some of these same clowns wanted to go to a quote-unquote a gold standard. Richard Nixon took the U.S. Off of the gold standard, a correct move. But these are people that are with Make America Great Again. These are relics. And they know that their days are numbered. This is the reason we had this extraordinary situation with census that is taken every 10 years, mandated by the Constitution, a count of all persons, whether they be citizens or not. And the administration, on a phony pretext of the Voting Rights Act, wanted to put a question there: are you a citizen? Well, the Supreme Court, under Justice Roberts, ruled against that particular proposition. Now the Trump administration, Justice Department, were finally forced they have to print the new census to send out, and that deadline was on the 30th of June, the last day of June. Now they are being printed. That idea fell apart. a major defeat. But what is happening here now on this 4th of July 2019, you will see more and more of these defeats happening, no matter what happens in the presidential election. The right wing is by the minute becoming much weaker in the U.S. because of the precarious condition of quote-unquote capitalism itself. Reforms such as Medicare for all, single payer, you can call it what you want, but it's a move to ensure the American citizens, period. Now, the old argument, well, do you have a private insurance there, or you don't have private insurance? Bernie Sanders says no on to his plan. Some of the other Democrats said the same. Kamala Harris at one time supported it. She walked back on it and immediately became a favorite of corporate media. But it doesn't matter because of the conditions of capitalism. The American people will have, on July 4th to come, single payer, Medicare for all, or whatever. That is the direction the country is forced to go because of cost. Period. And because of outrageous co-pays that are mandated, the cost of insulin and various other things, you have to have a systematic and comprehensive approach. You can't just say, well, drug companies, we're going to try to legislate that you sell to the Medicare program, such as the VA, under one particular situation where the prices would come down. Well, yes, it is about a price, but it's also about what is paid for medical procedures and access to preventive care. Very, very important to deal with hypertension, diabetes, and those kinds of problems which many of us struggle with. If you get your diabetes down, which we did, you get your blood pressure down, and then you have arteries that are clogged up and have to look at bypass surgery. So these are some of the things that occur here, and these things are very expensive. They're not cheap. They are covered by Medicare, therefore medical centers do them. But we're talking about preventing many of these diseases from occurring, getting insulin to people that have to have it, and various other drugs that are very expensive, where people have to ration these in a country that is quote-unquote the richest country in the world. And all of this because of this obfuscation, because of these paramilitary types, Chicago PD, various other people being honored by this administration. When Heather was killed in Charlottesville, Virginia, the situation there was DJ Trump said there were good people on both sides. That was an absolute lie. Period. And the media should have spent the next year debasing him for that. They did not. Why? Because DJ Trump, we'd say in the old days, sells newspaper, and this is now sells advertisement. Things are quote-unquote search engines are making hay out of it. This is what this is all about, the commercialization. You now have everybody on Twitter from Bolsonaro, Jair Bolsonaro, the fascist in Brazil, who is trying to render the Aboriginal people in the Amazon extinct, to steal their national resources. This is what it's all about, the theft of national resources. You see that what had happened in Libya after the murder of the late Colonel Gaddafi, and now you have a war going on there with a quote-unquote recognized government and a governor and a general from down in the west of there on the Hafar, General Hafar and his forces closing in on Libya. Some refugees are being killed because of gunfire. He says that his people did not do it, but there are guns, missiles all around. And that destabilization would not be there had not been for these conflicts. This is why you're having more and more refugees In Guatemala, El Salvador, and those places, you have these criminal gangs there that have forced people out. Therefore, refugees are coming, dangerous walks, etc., to the U.S. borders. And on the immigration laws, once they come, they are identified. There's no big debate about their identification. It's solid. And they should be assigned a court date and to make bail, or assigned to families, etc. They can do this. But instead of that, they have a national disgrace behind this racist border patrol. That has been established. You don't need to go to the Facebook group. You just need to interview the people that were told to drink out of toilets. If this would be happening to Europeans, the head of the border patrol would be resigning, all of his or her lackeys would be gone, and various other people responsible, they would turn in their badges immediately. This is an outrage. This is not what this day is about. We'll see you on a Friday Jobber and the week that was, and we'll have an open source report either coming up this week or early next week. Our schedule has been sort of hampered a bit, but we are trying to move back to it. This is Boston Red in the Jared Pippin broadcast booth on the 4th of July 2019, and what we have titled A Militarist 4th of July. We're playing with that title, but we will get the title straight. Good day and happy holiday to
with members of our military and their families. With veterans whose service we will never forget and always honor. And with Gold Star families whose loved ones rest all around. To those of you who mourn the loss of a loved one today, my heart goes out to you. I love my daughters more than anything in the world, and I cannot imagine losing them. I can't imagine losing a sister or brother or parent at war. The grief so many of you carry in your hearts is a grief I cannot fully know. And this day is about you and the fallen heroes that you loved. And it's a day that has meaning for all Americans, including me. It's one of my highest honors. It is my most solemn responsibility as President to serve as Commander-in-Chief of one of the finest fighting forces the world has known. And it's a responsibility that carries a special weight on this day. It carries a special weight each time I meet with our Gold Star families, and I see the pride in their eyes, but also the tears of pain that will never fully go away. Each time I sit down at my desk and sign a condolence letter to the family of the fallen, sometimes a family will write me back and tell me about their daughter or son that they've lost, or a friend will write me a letter about what their battle buddy meant to them. I received one such letter from an Army veteran named Paul Tarbox after I visited Arlington a couple of years ago. Paul saw a photograph of me walking through Section 60, where the heroes who fell in Iraq and Afghanistan lay, by a headstone marking the final resting place of Staff Sergeant Joe Faneuf. Joe, he told me, was a friend of his, one of the best men he'd ever known, the kind of guy who could have the entire barracks in laughter, who was always there to lend a hand, from being a volunteer coach to helping build a playground. It was a moving letter, and Paul closed it with a few words about the hallowed cemetery where we are gathered here today. He wrote, "The venerable warriors that slumber there knew full well the risks that are associated with military service and felt pride in defending our democracy. The true lesson of Arlington," he continued, "is that each headstone is that of a patriot. Each headstone shares a story. Thank you for letting me share with you the story about my friend Joe. Staff Sergeant Joe Fanouf was a patriot, like all the venerable warriors who lay here and across this country and around the globe. Each of them adds honor to what it means to be a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, and Coast Guardsman. Each is a link in an unbroken
with his Memorial Day address. Hello, everybody. This is Jerry Pippin, and this is Memorial Day 2011. And we are going to spend the next few minutes just kind of reminiscing about Memorial Days over the years and what they've meant to me and what they mean to you and what they mean to all of us in this country. And basically, if you look at the Blog Talk page where we are right now, near my hometown of Muskogee, there's another little town called Fort Gibson, right across from the Arkansas River. And they have a national cemetery there. And if you want to know the sacrifices that American soldiers and military people have given over the years, I suggest you go to a national cemetery wherever you are. They're not only in this country, they're in Europe. And of course, the one at Normandy is very famous. And we can see that many, many people have ended up giving their lives for the safety and the ideals of this country. And basically, we, as we look at the flags that are flying over each of the graves, and this, I had the same experience yesterday when I went to Memorial Park here in Muskogee, where my father is buried and my mother. And they're buried in a veteran section. And basically, it brings home the price of liberty. And I am going to get into some of the things about liberty here in a moment and some of my own personal experiences over Memorial Days. But before I do that, Memorial Day has morphed into something more than just a holiday to honor our veterans, even though that's what it is. And that's what it was planned to be. Memorial Day is a day when we begin to look back at our families and friends and all of them that have gone. And as you go through life and take the journey of living with all of its bittersweet realities, and I'm in the twilight years now, basically, you look back and you have a couple of thoughts. One thought is that it was a good life. You walked the high road. You took the low road. You did the jobs that you had to do. You took the steps that were necessary. And you can lift your head proudly. Then there's the other idea, and that's what it's all about, Alfie syndrome, about the movie. And basically, it's what is all of this about? What is that first cry you have as a baby to the final breath as a senior citizen? Obviously, Memorial Day is a good time to not think of the dead, even though we do that. But it's a good time to think about what our lives mean. And some of us think, life is inconsequential. And unfortunately, I see this more and more each day as communications have improved, and you have things like Twitter and Facebook, and people naturally gravitate toward posting their frustrations with the world, with their life, et cetera, et cetera. But I thought I would take this opportunity on Memorial Day to talk basically about what you, average John or Joan Q. citizen, can do, not only for your country, but for your family and for your life in general. And basically, it's something that goes back to the military, and it's a slogan the Army used: "Be the best you can be." And so when we think about Memorial Day, and we all have losses, many of these losses are fresh. For instance, columnist Jerry Wilhite of the JerryPippin.com staff passed away this year in April, just fairly recently. And as I was at the Memorial Park Cemetery here in Muskogee yesterday, remarking to my family, to my sisters, basically I said aloud to them, I wonder about Wilhite. He simply did not have the ability to return to his roots, where he was born here in this town where I live. We grew up as high school buddies and had a 50-year or so friendship. But the point I'm trying to make here is that he met an end, and his wife says that his ashes were spread on a hill overlooking the Pacific Ocean. So really it doesn't make any difference where we are, where the monuments are about us. What really counts is what we've done and the cornerstones of life. Now, I'm not trying to be a preacher here to everyone today, but I just want to encourage everyone to think about how precious life is, and how precious your life is, and how precious my life is. We opened this show with Ray Charles. Ray Charles was a magnificent entertainer. I remember seeing Ray Charles shortly before his death in Tulsa, Oklahoma. His legs would barely reach the piano pedals. He was a little guy, and he was blind. And he did quite a few things to ease the audience about his disabilities. In fact, one of those things he liked to do was walk up close to the edge of the stage. I've often wondered if he ever missed. But Ray Charles, in his rendition of America, the Beautiful, probably pretty well phrased it all. Remember, Ray Charles was born a black man. Ray Charles was born in a segregated America. Ray Charles saw the morphing of America's conscience to open its doors and its hearts and minds to all peoples of all colors. And we had to have some legislation to push us along, unfortunately, on that. But it has happened, and we now are in a more equal society than ever. Now, that doesn't mean that there's not any racism, and doesn't mean that there's not any, prejudice going on. Of course there is. But the idea is that it's much better than it has been, at least legally and realistically. It's up to you and me and every American and every person in the world listening to us here today or tonight, whatever time it is where you're listening to this show, to understand that we do have control our destiny. And then we get back to some of the things we don't control. And that's the men at the Fort Gibson National Cemetery and the men and women at every military cemetery, from Arlington to wherever. They really weren't able to control their destiny, were they? But they were there, and they gave their life for the dream, the American dream. Now, some of us, especially if you read some of my columns, wonder sometimes about, when I think about the American dream, I think we've lost the way in many ways. But at the same time, it's still a country that, at least on paper and at least ideally, basically says you and I and everyone deserve to be treated as human beings with respect and with honor. And that gets me back to Memorial Days that I remember. One of the things when I was in the Army that I did, and it changed my entire life, and I did not realize it at the time. And that was, I volunteered to be part of a group that did body escort for soldiers who were killed overseas in the Pacific Theater in Vietnam and Korea and elsewhere. And what back in those days, in the 60s, the military, basically, they did send some bodies back by air, but most of the time it was by rail. And so I spent a lot of time on the San Francisco Chief, basically a Santa Fe Railroad passenger train that went across country from Chicago to Los Angeles, and actually you stopped at Barstow or someplace and changed for LA and went on up to San Francisco. A couple of things about that. The interesting thing was that the San Francisco Chief was misnamed because the railroad actually didn't go into San Francisco. It was up on the East Bay someplace, and we had to go up there to get on the train. And this was a duty that I volunteered for because of many reasons, but one of the reasons was it had per diem, you paid, and you travel actually in first class. And basically your only duty was to make sure that when the funeral home arrived at the baggage car that they kept the head above the feet in the casket. And then you would go to the family, and you would explain things, and you would arrange for a military funeral. And there's something precious, something lonely, something thrilling about a military funeral, especially one where you have taps, and the taps are being played over the hillside on the other side of the grave. And then the gun salute. And then as far as my job, the toughest thing was actually two or three things. The toughest thing was, other than facing the family and explaining to them the circumstances of the death, the other toughest thing, besides explaining the benefits, and sometimes they were lacking, the other toughest thing was giving them the flag. There was a certain way that flag had to be folded. It had to come off off of the casket just a certain way. And I remember probably, and never will forget for my entire life, one particular instance. This was a PFC, and he had died and in combat, and basically I accompanied the body back up to a little town in Missouri, up in the foothills of Missouri in the Ozark Mountains. And the man was alone. His wife had died in a car wreck 3 weeks earlier. His daughter had died of a disease about 6 months before that. So I stayed there at the family house with him and accompanied him to the funeral. And I've often thought about him over the years. This is many years ago, so he's long since gone. But he had one hell of a tragedy. And each of these people that you hear about in the Iraq War, the Afghanistan War, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, each of those numbers, they have people that are mourning, that miss them. So this Memorial Day, think about those people. Think about all of those that have given their lives for the American dream. And let's try to keep the dream alive. Let's get back to basics. Basic life. The best for each of us, rich or poor, smart or dumb, whatever. America is a place of opportunity. And this Memorial Day, you and I, let's think about that and do everything we can to keep it the land of the brave, the land of the free, and most of all, the land of opportunity. We're going to close out with Resurrection Day. Thanks for listening. Boston Red's been the producer. I'm Jerry Pippin, and this has been Memorial Day 2011. Good night.
Xin chào Vietnam. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Please. To the government and the people of Vietnam, thank you for this very warm welcome and the hospitality that you've shown me on this visit. And thank all of you for being here today. We have Vietnamese from across this great country, including so many young people who represent the dynamism and the talent and the hope of Vietnam. On this visit, my heart has been touched by the kindness for which the Vietnamese people are known. And the many people who've been lining the streets, smiling and waving, I feel the friendship between our peoples. Last night, I visited the old quarter here in Hanoi and enjoyed some outstanding Vietnamese food, tried some bún cha. Drank some bia Hanoi. But I have to say, the busy streets of this city, I've never seen so many motorbikes in my life. So I haven't had to try to cross the street so far, but maybe when I come back and visit, you can tell me how. I am not the first American president to come to Vietnam in recent times, but I am the first, like so many of you, who came of age after the war between our countries. When the last U.S. forces left Vietnam, I was just 13 years old. So my first exposure to Vietnam and the Vietnamese people came when I was growing up in Hawaii, with its proud Vietnamese-American community there. At the same time, many people in this country are much younger than me. Like my two daughters, many of you have lived your whole lives knowing only one thing, and that is peace and normalized relations between Vietnam and the United States. So I come here mindful of the past, mindful of our difficult history, but focused on the future, the prosperity, security, and human dignity that we can advance together. I also come here with a deep respect for Vietnam's ancient heritage. For millennia, farmers have tended these lands, history revealed in the Dong Shun drums. At this bend in the river, Hanoi has endured for more than 1,000 years. The world came to treasure Vietnamese silks and paintings, and a great temple of literature stands as a testament to your pursuit of knowledge. And yet, over the centuries, your fate was too often dictated by others. Your beloved land was not always your own. But like bamboo, the unbroken spirit of the Vietnamese people was captured by Ly Chiong Kiet. The Southern Emperor rules the southern land. Our destiny is writ in heaven's book. So today, we also remember the longer history between Vietnamese and Americans that is too often overlooked. More than 200 years ago, when our founding fathers, Thomas Jefferson, sought rice for his farm, he looked to the rice of Vietnam, which he said had the reputation of being whitest to the eye, best flavored to the taste, and most productive. And soon after, American trade ships arrived in your ports seeking commerce. During the Second World War, Americans came here to support your struggle against occupation. When American pilots were shot down, the Vietnamese people helped rescue them. And on the day that Vietnam declared its independence, crowds took to the streets of this city, and Ho Chi Minh evoked the American Declaration of Independence. He said, "All people are created equal. The Creator has endowed them with inviolable rights. Among these rights are the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to pursuit of happiness." In another time, the profession of these shared ideals and our common story of throwing off colonialism might have brought us closer together sooner. But instead, Cold War rivalries and fears of communism pulled us into conflict. Like other conflicts throughout human history, we learned once more a bitter truth: that war, no matter what our intentions may be, brings suffering and tragedy. At your war memorial, not far from here, and with family altars across this country, you remember some 3 million Vietnamese soldiers and civilians on both sides who lost their lives. At our memorial wall in Washington, we can touch the names of 58,315 Americans who gave their lives in the conflict. In both our countries, our veterans and families of the fallen still ache for the friends and loved ones that they lost. Just as we learned in America that even if we disagree about a war, we must always honor those who serve and welcome them home with the respect they deserve, we can join together today, Vietnamese and Americans, and acknowledge the pain and the sacrifices on both sides. More recently, over the past 2 decades, Vietnam has achieved enormous progress, and today the world can see the strides that you have made. With economic reforms and trade agreements, including with the United States, you have entered the global economy, selling your goods around the world. More foreign investment is coming in. And with one of the fastest growing economies in Asia, Vietnam has moved up to become a middle-income nation. We see Vietnam's progress in the skyscrapers and high-rises of Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, new shopping malls and urban centers. We see it in the satellites Vietnam puts into space and a new generation that is online, launching startups and running new ventures. We see it in the tens of millions of Vietnamese connected on Facebook and Instagram. And you're not just posting selfies, although I hear you do that a lot. And so far, there have been a number of people who have already asked me for selfies. You're also raising your voices for causes that you care about, like saving the old trees of Hanoi. So all this dynamism has delivered real progress in people's lives. Here in Vietnam, you've dramatically reduced extreme poverty, you've boosted family incomes, and lifted millions into a fast-growing middle class. Hunger, disease, child and maternal mortality are all down. The number of people with clean drinking water and electricity, the number of boys and girls in school, and your literacy rate, these are all up. So this is extraordinary progress. This is what you have been able to achieve in a very short time. Think of Senator John McCain, who was held for years here as a prisoner of war, meeting General Zot, who said our countries should not be enemies but friends. Think of all the veterans, Vietnamese and American, who've helped us heal and build new ties. Few have done more in this regard over the years than a former Navy lieutenant and now Secretary of State for the United States, John Kerry, who is here today. And on behalf of all of us, John, we thank you for your extraordinary efforts. be public servants. One of them, who was born here, wrote me a letter and said, "By God's grace, I've been able to live the American dream. I'm very proud to be an American, but also very proud to be Vietnamese." And today he's here. Today he's here, back in the country of his birth, because he said his personal passion is improving the life of every Vietnamese person. I think of a new generation of Vietnamese, so many of you, so many of the young people who are here, who are ready to make your mark on the world. And I want to say to all the young people listening, your talent, your drive, your dreams, in those things Vietnam has everything it needs to thrive. And your destiny is in your hands. This is your moment, and as you pursue the future that you want, I want you to know that the United States of America will be right there with you as your partner and as your friend. And many years from now, when even more Vietnamese and Americans are studying with each other, innovating and doing business with each other, standing up for our security and promoting human rights and protecting our planet with each other, I hope you think back to this moment and draw hope from the vision that I've offered today. Or, if I can say it another way, in words that you know well from the tale of Kyo, please take from me this token of trust so we can embark upon our 100-year journey together. Kamun Chakvan. Thank you very much. Thank you, Vietnam. Thank you. 71 years ago, on a bright, cloudless morning, death fell from the sky and the world was changed. A flash of light and a wall of fire destroyed a city and demonstrated that mankind possessed the means to destroy itself. Why do we come to this place? To Hiroshima. We come to ponder a terrible force unleashed in a not-so-distant past. We come to mourn the dead, including over 100,000 Japanese men, women, and children. Thousands of Koreans, a dozen Americans held prisoner. Their souls speak to us. They ask us to look inward, to take stock of who we are and what we might become. It is not the fact of war that sets Hiroshima apart. Artifacts tell us that violent conflict appeared with the very first man. Our early ancestors, having learned to make blades from flint and spears from wood, used these tools not just for hunting, but against their own kind. On every continent, the history of civilization is filled with war, whether driven by scarcity of grain or hunger for gold, compelled by nationalist fervor or religious zeal. Empires have risen and fallen. Peoples have been subjugated and liberated. And at each juncture, innocents have suffered a countless toll, their names forgotten by time. The world war that reached its brutal end in Hiroshima and Nagasaki was fought among the wealthiest and most powerful of nations. Their civilizations had given the world great cities and magnificent art. Their thinkers had advanced ideas of justice and harmony and truth. And yet, the war grew out of the same base instinct for domination, for conquest that had caused conflicts among the simplest tribes. An old pattern amplified by new capabilities and without new constraints. In the span of a few years, some 60 million people would die. Men, women, children. No different than us. Shot, beaten, marched, bombed, jailed, starved, gassed to death. There are many sites around the world that chronicle this war. Memorials that tell stories of courage and heroism. Graves and empty camps that echo of unspeakable depravity. Yet in the image of a mushroom cloud that rose into these skies, we are most starkly reminded.
This is Sarah Guthrie, granddaughter of Woody Guthrie.
As I was walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. Let's sing it together. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. Oh, I've roamed and rambled, and I follow my footsteps through the sparkling sands of her diamond deserts, and all around me a voice was sounding. This land was made for you and me. All at once. This land is your land. This land is mine. To the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream water. This land was made for you and me. There was a great high wall there that tried to stop me, and on the wall it said no trespassing. But on the other side, it didn't say nothing. That side was made for you and me. This is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land was made for you and me. Oh, nobody living could ever stop us as we go walking our freedom highway. Nobody living can make us turn back. 'Cause why?
This land was made for you and me.
Loud and clear. This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Gulf Stream waters. This land